This is the Digital Savage Experience Podcast, hosted by Roman Prokopchuk, bringing you all things digital marketing, tech, business, and motivation. What's stopping you from becoming relentless in all aspects of life? Are you ready to become a digital savage? Let's get into today's episode.
Hey everyone, this is Roman Prokopchuk, and this is the Digital Savage Experience Podcast. Today I have with me Cody McLain, who is an entrepreneur since the age of 14. He is the founder of SupportNinja, providing outsourcing support to some of the biggest companies in Silicon Valley, and the author of From Foster Care to Millionaire. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So get into your story a little bit. How'd you get started? I know the book covers a lot of this, but kind of how'd you become an entrepreneur, a founder? What drove you?
So it started when I was about 14. I was kind of an odd kid in school. I didn't really fit in. And I ended up being a poor kid going to a rich high school. And I wanted to find something, but I was never good at sports, never really found my thing. And then one day, my friend, who was actually quite rich, his mom was upset at him and he wanted to buy the new Xbox. And so he thought of a way to go around her is by starting a business. And so we brainstormed all these different business ideas, and I thought the majority of them were just absolutely ridiculous. But then somehow we settled on the idea of opening up a hosting account at HostGator.com and providing reseller hosting, and somehow that would make us rich. And about a week later, it kind of fell apart. But for some reason, that idea of finding a template, of brainstorming a domain name and thinking of a name for a company and selling it and actually making money, it appealed to me. So I stuck with it. And ever since then, I had a business from that 14, 15 years old, and that grew into a series of businesses and failures and successes throughout my childhood. Later on, so my dad died actually even prior to that. He died when I was 11. And so it was just my mom, my sister, and I then I going to the school. And it kind of gave me a purpose in some sense of actually, in some ways, it was wanting to prove to these other rich kids that I could be just as successful as they were, and I didn't need my parents' money. And so that kind of blossomed, and eventually my mother actually passed at around the age of 17. And I was in a foster care for a short period of time. And actually my book, it starts off at the beginning where I'm actually being driven to foster care. And at the same day, the business that I had, so again, it was a hosting company. And so we're providing web hosting services to other people around the world. And my server, it actually crashed that same day that I was being taken to foster care. And I remember actually arriving there, I'm all teary, crying, and I get this call on my cell phone, and it was from Scotland Yard. And so Scotland Yard was actually investigating me because they had received enough complaints from my customers in England that they were investigating that. And I literally just broke down and told them, like, I'm in foster care, like my server crashed and all these things. And she didn't honestly know what to say. But that was probably one of like the saddest days of my life, actually, is being in foster care and having my business die, which was at that point, it was everything that meant everything to me, right? That business, it was my baby. And to have it die and to be in foster care was not a great situation. But nonetheless, I recovered. I restarted the business. Some of my clients I was able to bring with me. And I just went through this whole period of basically I was surviving myself, trying to make money from the business. And long story short, to go all the way up to like 18 or 20 is I had a business partner up in Vancouver. I moved up there for a short period of time. The business had fell apart. We found this guy who was a penny stock investor, and he ended up scamming us out of the business. And at that point, I had built the business up to, it was generating around $600,000 a year. And we went to this whole lawsuit, and I won't get into the details of it, but my perspective, he was a very bad guy, and inevitably you're going to deal with bad people in business. But we ended up selling out the business, and I was left with $60,000 in my bank account, high school dropout in Seattle, had no friends, had no family. And I just went right back into that survival mode of, okay, I have to create another business. I have to be successful. And that was the founding of my next company called PacificHost.com. And then I moved to LA for a little bit of time, tried to become an actor, realized that wasn't my thing. And eventually I was able to sell Pacific Host for a little south of about $1 million. And then after that, I was like, wow, I've had my first successful exit. Then I went off and became a pilot, did scuba diving, became a rescue diver, started learning photography, started traveling the world. And then eventually that led me to founding my current company called SupportNinja. And SupportNinja is an outsourced company where we provide outsourced technical support to other companies like Checker. We do RV share. We have a lot of other Silicon Valley clients I can't actually name, but we have about 500 plus people in the Philippines, about 12 people here in Austin, Texas, and we provide outsourced technical support. And that, I know that's like a lot. And then that also led me to basically writing my book, because I've met a lot of young kids, of underprivileged youth, who feel like they're not going to ever do anything that's worthwhile in their life. And I want to let them know that that's totally untrue, because I was fat, I was bullied, I was made fun of, and I had to constantly prove everybody else that I could do it, and it was actually everybody else telling me that I can't, that in some ways fueled that ambition, that desire to prove them wrong. And so that's kind of what my book's about, is wanting to inspire others to raise their ambitions with what they think they're actually capable of. So that's my pitch.
No, that's really awesome. And me and my wife became foster parents, foster to adopt. So we're trying to kind of go about the system and be there for our foster kids. We want to adopt them, but it looks like they're going back to their biological mom. So being put in the foster system, how was it for you? Were you with your sibling, or did you guys get split up?
No, so I wasn't in the foster system for long. My mother was actually taken to it was not a mental health, it was an addiction clinic, because she was addicted to alcohol. And so my grandfather was able to have a judge actually committed to this hospital to remove her from her alcoholism. So it was only a few weeks, and then I was able to go back with my mother. Until then, she died. But luckily, I had somebody that was a friend of my grandfather that was a retired judge, and he was actually able to get me a legal guardian that was able to prevent me from going back into foster care. And the way I supported myself again was having a business. So it was part luck and just situational context of being able to get out of that situation. But when I was in foster care, I did befriend another kid, and I think his name was Joey, and his parents were drug addicts, and they couldn't take care of him, and I just fell for him, and I could see definitely how being a foster parent or trying to yourself, it can have a huge impact in the lives, because at least the foster family that I was with, I don't think they did it out of love and appreciation. I think they were doing it for the money, because you get X amount of money from the state, even though it's not a lot of money. But I think you can do it for the wrong or the right reasons. But I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. A lot of people do it for the wrong reason, but thinking about it, they can go and make so much more money if they put their mind to it, rather than, kind of exploiting or milking the system for these kids. So you kind of mentioned your first, trial and tribulation in terms of business when you got scammed by someone. How did you kind of overcome that?
Oh, that was hard. So the initial partnership I had is I had this older guy. His name is Brian. A fantastic guy. He kind of became like a father figure. And I basically said, okay, you handle the business, the legal infrastructure of it, and I'll do the marketing, I'll do the website, or do the branding. I'll basically get us the customers. And so that was the initial kind of agreement that we had. And he ended up having a friend that knew this guy that dealt with penny stock investors. And this guy was a smooth talking guy who could literally sell you on anything. He would always use a sales tactics of using pressure, like, you got to do it now. And we ended up signing a tentative agreement. And so all Brian did, he wrote the word tentative at the top. And then we were both hesitant, because this guy was saying, sell me your company and I will find you investors and we'll raise millions of dollars and we'll make it a much more successful company. But after we signed this tentative agreement, I Googled his name name, and then found out that he had scammed other people in the past. And then we went to a lawyer, and the lawyer was like, oh yeah, like this agreement is full of holes. You'll never have any troubles with it. But the problem is that he used scare tactics. He was able to scare us into submission, and both of us were scared. And I went through this whole period. I would actually say it was more traumatic to be in this year-long lawsuit with this guy than it was even when my parents died, because at least that was like an instant thing. It just happened. And with this, I was working on this company with Brian for years, and then this guy was basically trying to steal it away from us. And I went through this whole period where I was waking up every morning and I didn't know what to do, because I felt like if I worked and I invested in the company, if I built out the new website, if I tried to improve the company, that it might not matter in the end, because this guy could actually steal the company from us. But inevitably we settled and we gave him the company. But the problem is that he damaged the business during the lawsuit. So he was trying to, he was able to get the bank account shut down because he was saying he owned the business, and the bank was like, well, we don't know who owns the business, so we're going to shut the bank account down. And there was all these little things that he was able to do to basically coerce us, and he damaged the reputation of the company all the while. So when he did get ownership of the company, it was in a free fall at that time. Like, we were losing customers left and right. The reputation was damaged severely. And so he ended up having to pay the server bill of like 50, 60K a month that he couldn't actually afford. So he ended up just doing what's called a fire sale, where he just sold the assets. And I don't know if he even made any money from that. I think he kind of screwed himself over by screwing us in order to give him the company. But after that, Brian basically was resentful towards me and saying that I couldn't start another company without him, that it's his involvement that's what made it even remotely successful. And then I basically said, screw you. And I had a falling out, and I moved to Seattle. And then I'm in this mindset where I have no diploma. I didn't go to college, and I'm questioning, what am I going to do? And I ended up applying for a few jobs. And one of them was actually a hosting job. And that I told the guy, I was being honest, that, look, I want to start a hosting company on the side, because that's my dream. It's my vision for the future. And he's like, okay, I'll give you a $50 an hour job doing customer service for me, but you have to give me your company. And at that point, that was my full commitment of like, no, I am not going to give up my vision for a $15 an hour job. And I put my whole heart and effort into it, working 15, 16-hour days. I live, breathe, and eat that company. And I had no education whatsoever. It was just everything I was learning online and through trial and error, and seeing what other companies are doing and copying their success. And that eventually led me to have a successful company. And I'm still humble to this day. I have even a way more even successful company than I did in the past. But if I had let myself not go that route of building something, of sticking to that vision, that dream, then, none of this would have been possible.
No, yeah, you can't really give up on that. And I know you mentioned you worked long hours for a long period of time. And I think with founders and entrepreneurs, the topic of mental health comes up. So how were you kind of able to stay up in terms of your spirits and keep your mental health in check?
I still have anxiety to this day. It's still something I have to get over. But I started at some point. I started to read articles on Forbes and Entrepreneur, and I started to see what other successful people do. And for the most part, I was just working all the time, and I ended up burning myself out. But I didn't even know what burnout was. I was in this perpetual state of just being stressed out all the time. But after reading what other people did, they meditated, they read books, they exercised. Then slowly I started to read books. I think one of my first books I read was on the power of habit. And that showed me just how possible it was to actually start eating better, to exercise and whatnot. So I started challenging myself to just going on the treadmill for just 30 minutes a day. And then that allowed me to increase that goal and that ambition to exercising. And now today I exercise about 5 days a week. I'll alternate between jogging 4 miles and going to the gym and doing strength training. Then I also have my routine where I meditate. And so this is not something I had early on. This is probably what led to kind of a low-grade depression and anxiety later in my life. But I started to figure out how to deal with that as I went through dealing with life and all the trials and tribulations with it. But to clarify, today I have what I call my mind, body, and my mind, my body, my soul routine, where I'll wake up, I'll meditate for 20 minutes. I like to use either the Headspace app or YouTube. I know there's tons of other ways of doing it, but I like how Headspace allows you to pick a track in a specific area, whether it's being kind to yourself, having more compassion, having more creativity, having more focus, is that I like to be able to have a specific meditation where I can focus on this one area. And then I'll do the exercise, and then I'll also read for 30 minutes a day. Getting a Kindle was one of the most profound, helpful things I've ever had. And the first time when I started reading 30 minutes a day, after 6 months, I was able to look back and I'm like, wow, I'm so much smarter. Like, I wish I had started reading a lot earlier in life. And I always thought I would never read books because they're so boring. And somehow I got into the habit. It's like a slow addiction, I think. It's like reading a book. It's like a video game. You can get addicted to it instantly because that feedback, that dopamine receptor is like so quick from that feedback mechanism. And books, it takes a lot longer, right? But the longer you stick it out, the more you will see the benefits of doing that. And then it kind of hooks you into it. But for the most part, to answer your question, I think mindfulness, having more of an awareness about my thoughts, what triggers bad behavior, and then how to rectify that through meditation or healthy habits.
Yeah, I think as you get older, you get a better sense of emotional IQ and self-awareness. So that really helps kind of make you become a more rounded person. And I think I've had the same thing in my youth, where if I look back, if I handled situations how I do now, the outcomes would have been a lot more streamlined.
Right.
So in terms of SupportNinja, it would probably be your biggest company to date in terms of employees and people managed.
Yes.
So how do you kind of deal with a bigger company, more so the biggest one you've had thus far? What kind of things come into play as you scale and get more employees, especially employees that a lot of which are remote?
Well, actually, most of our employees are in an office. So we're in Austin. We have an Austin-based office, and then in the Philippines. So I went over there for like 45 days, 2 months the first time, and then that's how I established our office in the Philippines. And we have about 500 people in our Philippine office, and that certainly wasn't an easy process. I don't know that I would wish it upon anybody to go figure out how to register a foreign corporation in a third world country. Definitely was not an easy thing to do, but now that I'm here, it's amazing and humbling to have such a huge company. But it's also presented its fair share of challenges, right? I think our biggest issue that we're having right now is either going to be in the range of capital because of all the assets and computers and building out new office space, but then also of culture, because once you expand out of a certain number of people, it can be difficult to try and maintain that sense of unique culture that makes SupportNinja what it was when I first started it out. So those are our biggest issues at the moment. But another way I've had of dealing with the management is just understanding that I'm not a great manager, and I also don't really have a huge desire to lead in the operations. So I was lucky to find a great CEO, Connor Tomkeys, who I've been working with for a few years, and he basically runs the company. So I made him CEO. I have a great chief operating officer, and I have regular meetings with our executive team leadership every week, and we go over various KPIs and metrics. And I like to provide my own insights and ideas that help to try and make it more unique. I like to see myself as like a problem solver. So everybody else kind of has their roles. They're making sure all the sub departments are meeting their objectives. And I like to see if I see a problem spot, I like to do a deep dive into that and seeing, is it a people-based problem? Is it a process issue, or is it a culture issue? And trying to determine what's the way that we can try and fix this so that as we continue to scale, we don't have that same issue. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important when you're growing not to lose the culture you were founded in, and then scalability, obviously, that it doesn't get out of hand in terms of growing too fast or at whatever pace that you want to grow.
Right.
So in terms of someone coming from any kind of situation, a privileged one, a troubled one, they want to do something, they want to start a company, what's one kind of takeaway you can leave with the audience in terms of what's helped you over time?
For me, it's having a belief in myself. When younger, I didn't have that belief. I didn't have that self-confidence because I didn't know anything. And I thought it was a disadvantage of being a high school dropout and not going to school and having an MBA, knowing a lot about business. But in reality, that was my advantage, is that I was able to use that inexperience of looking at something in a new way. Like all my companies, they were businesses that were in existing niche markets, but I found a market that was underutilized. It had less competitors in it. And in some ways they were new areas. And so I didn't have that experience. I didn't even know how to do outsourcing in the beginning. I discovered it as I went along. And so it's helpful to know that even if you don't have a full understanding of something, if you have a desire, if you see an opportunity, that you shouldn't let that little voice in your head that says, I can't, stop you from doing it. It was simply through pure work and determination, I was able to start everything I have today. Even when I started SupportNinja, I was super afraid. Like, how am I going to register a corporation in a third world country? How am I going to understand the labor laws of what if there's corruption? What if there's all these things, all these things race through my head. Inevitably, anybody, if you're starting a business, if you're doing something new, but you can't let that stop you. You just have to put one foot in front of the other and just trust that your future self will handle it. And inevitably, that's what's happened in my case and many of the other successful entrepreneurs I see around myself. So have that belief, that self-confidence. Don't let it get you down, and just look in the short term and trust that your future self will be able to take care of it.
No, I totally agree. And regardless of what anyone's doing, that's really important. So I really appreciate you coming on today. Can you let the audience know how to find you or anything you have going on that you want to highlight?
Sure. So I have a weekly newsletter. I call it the Mind Hack Digest. I send out an interesting story of the week, and it has either immoral or ethical implications that you can then apply to your own life. I do it in everything from business stories to Greek mythological stories. And it's always super fascinating. And I always combine that with interesting links like new studies, new psychology studies, interesting things on productivity and business that I found over the week as well. You can find that out just by going to my website, CodyMcLain.com. That's CodyMclain.com. Or also follow me on Twitter at CodyMcLain.com.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
If you're like me, finding a place to eat is never an easy thing to do. Whether I'm in my hometown of Ewing, New Jersey, or traveling, I always find myself wishing I had a trusted friend I could call to tell me where to eat. The infatuation is that friend. The infatuation helps you find the right restaurant for any situation. Need a place for a first date? Trying to find a spot for your birthday that you don't want to celebrate except you also kind of do? The infatuation has you covered in all of these situations and many more. So if you ever need to find a place to eat but don't want to read through thousands of unreliable crowdsourced reviews, hit up theinfatuation.com or download their free app for iOS and Android to search thousands of restaurant reviews and guides in 22 major cities around the world. Or let the infatuation do the work for you by sending a text to 64560. A real person will respond and help you find a restaurant that's perfect for whatever situation you find yourself in.
This podcast has been brought to you by Nova Zora Digital. Find out how Nova Zora Digital can help your company grow online. Learn more at novazoradigital.com. Until next time, all you digital savages.